The leather-bound journal trembled in Delilah Zimmerman's hands as she stood over her husband's grave for the last time, dirt still fresh on the mound, knowing she had to leave this place or die of the same slow, agonizing consumption that had taken Thomas 6 weeks ago in the spring of 1882. She was 24 years old and already a widow, standing in the small cemetery outside Lusk, Wyoming, with nothing but a wagon, 2 horses, and a trunk full of medical journals Thomas had collected during his years as a physician. The wind whipped across the prairie, pulling at her black mourning dress and the edges of her bonnet as she traced her fingers over the dates carved into the simple wooden cross. March 12, 1857 to April 3, 1882. 25 years was all he had gotten, and she had only shared 3 of them with him. Delilah had watched Thomas waste away, coughing blood into handkerchiefs she boiled every night, his brilliant mind deteriorating along with his body as the disease ravaged his lungs. The doctors in Cheyenne had shaken their heads with resignation. Consumption was a death sentence, they said. Nothing to be done but make him comfortable. But Delilah had refused to accept that, spending every spare moment reading through Thomas's medical texts, searching for something, anything that might help. It was in those desperate late-night readings that she first encountered references to medicinal springs scattered throughout the Western territories. Hot springs and mineral waters that indigenous peoples had used for healing long before white settlers arrived. Springs that reportedly cured ailments from rheumatism to skin diseases to respiratory conditions. By the time she found these accounts, Thomas was too weak to travel, but the idea had taken root in her mind like a seed waiting for spring. Now, with Thomas buried and nothing tying her to Lusk except painful memories, Delilah had made her decision. She would find these healing waters. She would document their properties, test their efficacy, and perhaps save others from the grief that had hollowed out her chest until she felt like an empty vessel going through the motions of living. The problem was that most of the medical journals were frustratingly vague about locations. They mentioned springs in Montana Territory, in Colorado, in Nevada, but rarely with enough detail to actually find them. The indigenous peoples who knew the locations best were understandably reluctant to share their sacred sites with the settlers who had taken so much from them already. Delilah loaded her wagon carefully, packing Thomas's journals in oilcloth to protect them from the elements, along with her few possessions, some basic supplies, and the small amount of money she had left after selling their house to pay his medical debts. She wore her widow's black, but underneath her dress she had strapped on a small pistol Thomas had taught her to shoot. The frontier was no place for a woman alone, and she was practical enough to know she would need protection. She was hitching the horses when she noticed a man watching her from across the street. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly under his hat. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty from travel, with a well-maintained gun belt slung low on his hips. What caught her attention most was the way he leaned heavily on the hitching post, favoring his right leg in a way that spoke of chronic pain rather than a fresh injury. The man caught her looking and tipped his hat respectfully before turning to limp down the boardwalk. Delilah felt a pang of curiosity but turned back to her preparations. She had her own troubles to worry about. She had been on the trail for 3 days, heading northwest based on a vague reference to hot springs near the Bighorn Mountains, when her wagon wheel hit a hidden rut in the rough terrain and cracked clean through. The sudden jolt sent her lurching forward, and only her grip on the reins kept her from tumbling off the seat. The horses whinnied and stamped, sensing her distress as she climbed down to assess the damage. It was bad. The wheel was split almost completely, and she had no way to repair it properly out here in the middle of nowhere. She could see the mountains in the distance, purple and imposing against the summer sky, but there were no towns, no homesteads, nothing but endless grass and the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking where water ran. Delilah stood there in the late afternoon heat, feeling the first real stirrings of fear since she had left Lusk. What had she been thinking, coming out here alone? She was a doctor's widow with some medical knowledge and a lot of determination, but that did not make her a frontiersman. She had water for maybe 2 more days if she rationed carefully, some jerky and hardtack, and absolutely no idea how to fix a broken wagon wheel in the wilderness. She was considering whether to unhitch one of the horses and ride for help when she heard hoofbeats approaching from the east. Her hand instinctively went to the pistol, hidden in the folds of her skirt, as a rider appeared over a low rise, leading a pack horse behind him. It was the same man from Lusk, the one who had been watching her prepare to leave. Up close, she could see he was probably in his late 20s, with gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and a day's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. He pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance away and dismounted, still favoring that right leg. "Madam," he said, his voice a low drawl that suggested he was originally from somewhere further south. "Looks like you have run into some trouble." Delilah's hand stayed near her pistol. "I have the situation under control, thank you." The man's mouth quirked slightly, not quite a smile. "Respectfully, madam, you do not look like you have it under control. That wheel is cracked through, and the nearest town is a good day's ride from here. Getting a lot further without help would be difficult." "Were you following me?" Delilah demanded, suspicion overriding her usual courtesy. "Yes, madam, I was." He said it plainly, without apology. "Name is Isaiah Vance. I saw you loading up in Lusk, heard you asking questions at the general store about hot springs and healing waters. Figured you might be heading the same direction I was." Delilah's eyes narrowed. "And what direction would that be, Mr. Vance?" Isaiah shifted his weight, and she saw him wince slightly. "I am looking for hot springs myself. Heard tell there are some up in the mountains that the Crow Indians use for healing. Got a bum leg courtesy of a Mustang that did not want to be broken, and a town doctor who did more harm than good trying to set it. 3 years now it has been giving me trouble, aching something fierce in cold weather and after a long day in the saddle. A Crow woman I met in Montana Territory told me about springs that might help, but she did not trust me enough to say exactly where they were." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "I heard you asking about mineral springs, hot water, healing properties. Figured maybe we could help each other. You look like someone who has been doing research, and I know these territories pretty well. Been working cattle drives from Texas to Montana for the better part of 10 years. Delilah wanted to dismiss him outright, to send him on his way and maintain her independence. But the broken wheel and the vast emptiness around them made that impulse foolish. She was practical above all else, and practically speaking, she needed help. "I am researching medicinal springs," she admitted carefully. "My husband was a physician. He died of consumption 2 months ago. I spent months reading about mineral waters and their potential healing properties. I want to find these springs, document them properly, understand what makes them effective." Something softened in Isaiah's expression. "I am sorry for your loss, madam." The simple sincerity in his words hit her unexpectedly, and Delilah had to look away, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. She had cried so much in the past months that she thought she had no tears left, but apparently grief did not work that way. "Thank you," she managed. "And I suppose I could use assistance. If you can help me repair this wheel well enough to reach the next town, I would be grateful." Isaiah looked at the wheel and shook his head. That wheel is not going to make it to the next town no matter what we do. But I passed an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles back. Looked abandoned. Might have some tools, maybe even some lumber we could use to make a proper repair. If you do not mind waiting here with the wagon, I could ride back and see what I can find." It was a reasonable suggestion, but Delilah felt uneasy about being left alone in the wilderness. Still, what choice did she have? "How long would you be gone?" "Few hours at most. I will move fast." He paused, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rifle, offering it to her. "Take this. You have got a pistol. I saw you checking it, but a rifle has better range if anything comes sniffing around. Wolves mostly, though they should not bother you during daylight." Delilah accepted the rifle, touched by the gesture despite her wariness. "You trust me with your weapon? You are a doctor's widow doing research on medicinal springs. I figure you are not going to shoot me and steal my horse." That almost smile appeared again. "Besides, you look like someone who keeps her word. Am I wrong about that?" "No," Delilah said quietly. "You are not wrong." Isaiah nodded, mounted his horse with a stiffness that spoke of his injured leg paining him, and rode back the way he had come, leading his pack horse behind him. Delilah watched until he disappeared over the rise, then set about making a small camp beside the wagon, laying out a blanket in the shade and rationing herself some water and a piece of hardtack. The afternoon stretched long and hot. She spent the time reviewing her notes, cross-referencing the vague descriptions in Thomas's medical journals with the few maps she had. If Isaiah was right about the Crow knowing of healing springs in this region, that correlated with several references she had found to indigenous healing practices in the Bighorn area. One journal entry, written by an Army doctor in 1877, mentioned a hot spring with high mineral content that the Crow claimed could heal wounds and ease joint pain. The problem was that the Army doctor had not recorded exact coordinates, only that the spring was in the mountains west of the Bighorn River, in a valley accessible only by those who know the land. Helpful, that. Delilah had been operating mostly on hope and stubbornness, planning to ask locals and indigenous peoples she might encounter, though she was fully aware that most would not want to share such information with her. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when she heard hoofbeats returning. Isaiah appeared, and behind his pack horse he was dragging several long pieces of rough-cut timber and what looked like an old wheel, battered but intact. "Found more than I hoped for," he called out as he approached. "The cabin had been a way station once, I think. Plenty of scrap wood and this wheel. It is not a perfect match, but if we are careful, we can make it work." They worked together as the light faded, Isaiah doing most of the heavy labor despite his bad leg while Delilah helped where she could, holding pieces steady and following his instructions. He worked with the easy competence of someone who had spent years making do with limited resources on the trail, and despite herself, Delilah found her opinion of him improving. By the time full darkness fell, they had the new wheel attached. It was not pretty, and it would not win any prizes for craftsmanship, but it would hold long enough to get them to the nearest town, or better yet, to the springs themselves if they could find them. "We should camp here tonight," Isaiah said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Start fresh in the morning, if you do not mind the company, that is." Delilah hesitated, but only briefly. They had been working together for hours now, and he had been nothing but respectful. "I do not mind. Thank you for your help, Mr. Vance." "Isaiah is fine, madam." "And what should I call you, if you do not mind my asking?" "Delilah." "Delilah Zimmerman." They made a simple camp, Isaiah building a small fire while Delilah prepared a basic meal from their combined supplies. She had beans and coffee. He had fresh rabbit he had shot that morning. and together they managed something substantially better than the hardtack she had been subsisting on. As they ate, Isaiah asked about her research, and Delilah found herself talking more freely than she had in months. She told him about Thomas's illness, about the helplessness she had felt watching him die, about the references to medicinal springs that had given her this purpose when she had nothing else left. "I know it might seem foolish," she said, staring into the fire, "chasing after what might just be frontier legends and indigenous stories that lose something in translation. But I have to believe there is more we can do for people who are suffering, more than just making them comfortable while they die." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, then said, "I do not think it is foolish at all. I have seen things out here that city doctors would say are impossible. I have seen snake bites cured with poultices made from plants the Shoshone use. Saw a man with a festering wound that 3 different doctors said would kill him, healed up after he soaked in a hot spring for a week. There is medicine in these lands that we are only starting to understand." "The Crow woman who told you about the springs," Delilah said. "Do you think she would talk to me? Maybe, though she is probably 300 miles north of here by now. Her band moves with the seasons." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a small shower of sparks. "But I know someone else who might help. There is a trading post about 2 days northwest of here, run by a man named Samuel Bridger. He married into the Crow, has lived out here for 30 years. If anyone knows where those healing springs are, it would be him." Hope sparked in Delilah's chest, the first real hope she had felt since leaving Lusk. "You really think he would tell us? If we approach him right, show proper respect, maybe. He is a good man, but he does not suffer fools, and he does not take kindly to people who want to exploit sacred sites for profit." "I do not want profit," Delilah said firmly. "I want knowledge. I want to help people." Isaiah met her eyes across the fire, and she saw belief there. "Then we will make him understand that." They talked late into the night, swapping stories of their lives. Isaiah told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to a cholera outbreak when he was 16, about the years he had spent working cattle drives because he had no other family and nowhere else to go. The injury to his leg had happened 3 years ago, and while it had healed enough for him to walk and ride, the chronic pain had made it difficult to do the hard physical labor that cattle driving required. "I am running out of time," he admitted. "Another year or 2, and I will not be able to work drives at all. I have saved some money, enough maybe to buy a small piece of land, but what good is land if I cannot work it properly? That is why I am looking for these springs. Not just hoping for some miracle cure, but at least maybe some relief. Enough that I can keep working, keep living the only life I know." Delilah understood that desperation, the feeling of time running out and options narrowing. It was what had driven her out here too, though her quest was more about meaning than physical healing. The next morning, they set out together, Delilah's wagon creaking along behind her horses, while Isaiah rode alongside on his bay gelding. The makeshift wheel held, though they moved slowly over the rough terrain, following deer trails and ancient paths that Isaiah seemed to navigate by instinct. The landscape changed gradually as they moved northwest, the endless prairie giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine and juniper. The air grew clearer and cooler, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Delilah found herself relaxing despite the uncertainty of their situation, finding comfort in Isaiah's steady presence and the vast beauty of the land around them. They talked as they traveled, and Delilah discovered that, beneath his quiet cowboy exterior, Isaiah had a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor that occasionally caught her off guard. He had educated himself during long nights on the trail, reading whatever books he could get his hands on, and he had a natural curiosity about the world that matched her own. On the second day, as they crested a ridge, Isaiah pointed to a thin line of smoke rising from a valley below. "That will be Bridger's trading post." The trading post was a sturdy log structure built near a creek, with a corral out back holding several horses and a few outbuildings scattered around. As they approached, a man emerged from the main building, tall and grizzled with long gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in harsh conditions. "Isaiah Vance," the man called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I heard you were laid up in Montana with that leg of yours. What brings you back to this country?" "Hello, Samuel," Isaiah replied, dismounting carefully. "Still looking for those healing springs you were kind enough not to tell me about last time I came through." Samuel Bridger's eyes moved to Delilah, assessing her in a way that felt thorough but not unkind. "And who might this be?" "Delilah Zimmerman," Delilah said before Isaiah could answer, climbing down from her wagon. "I am researching medicinal springs. My husband was a physician before he died, and I am continuing his work." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "Come inside. We will talk." The interior of the trading post was cluttered but organized, with furs hanging from the rafters, shelves stocked with supplies, and a corner dedicated to indigenous crafts and goods. Samuel poured them coffee from a pot on the stove and settled into a chair, gesturing for them to sit. "I get maybe 3-4 people a year coming through here asking about healing springs," he said without preamble. "Most of them want to set up some kind of resort, charge rich folks from back east to come take the waters. I do not help those people. The springs are sacred to the Crow, have been for generations. They have already lost so much. I will not be party to taking this from them too." "I do not want to commercialize the springs," Delilah said earnestly. "I want to study them, understand their properties, document their healing effects. My husband died because medicine failed him. There has to be more we can learn, more we can do to help people." "And what will you do with this knowledge once you have it?" Samuel asked, his gaze sharp. Delilah had not thought that far ahead, but she answered honestly. "Share it. Publish my findings. Help other doctors understand what makes these waters effective so they can better treat their patients. And in doing that, you will bring more people here. Doctors, patients, everyone looking for miracle cures." Delilah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. He was right, and she could not pretend otherwise. "I suppose I would," she said quietly. "But is that such a terrible thing? If these waters can truly heal people, should that not be available to those who need it?" "At what cost?" Samuel countered. "I have seen what happens when white folks find something valuable on Indian land. It does not end well for the Indians." They sat in heavy silence for a moment. Then Isaiah spoke up. "What if we could find a way to share the knowledge while respecting the Crow's rights to the land? Make sure any access to the springs happens on their terms, with their consent." Samuel snorted. "That would be a fine thing, but you and I both know the government does not much care about Indian consent these days." "Then maybe we start smaller," Delilah said, an idea forming. "Maybe I do my research quietly, document everything carefully, but I do not publish anything without first consulting with the Crow. Let them decide what knowledge can be shared and what should remain protected." "And if they say none of it can be shared?" Samuel challenged. Delilah met his eyes steadily. "Then I will respect that decision. My goal is to help people heal, Mr. Bridger, not to exploit sacred sites or contribute to further injustices against indigenous peoples. If the Crow decide the springs should remain secret, then at least I will have tried, and at least I will have gained knowledge that might help me find other solutions." Samuel studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. There is a Crow elder, a medicine woman named Speaks with Water. She knows the springs better than anyone, tends them, keeps them sacred. If I can arrange a meeting and if she agrees to help you, then I will tell you how to find the springs. But you go on her terms, you respect her guidance, and you give me your word that you will not abuse her trust. You have my word, Delilah said immediately. Samuel looked at Isaiah. And you know me, Samuel. I have never broken a promise to you. Samuel nodded slowly. Speaks with Water's band is camped about a day's ride from here in their summer grounds. I will send a message, see if she is willing to meet with you. Might take a few days to get a response. You are welcome to wait here. Those few days stretched into a week, but neither Delilah nor Isaiah minded. Samuel gave them space to camp near the trading post, and they fell into an easy routine. Delilah spent her time organizing her notes and preparing questions for Speaks with Water, while Isaiah helped Samuel with various tasks around the post, earning their keep. In the evenings, Delilah and Isaiah would sit by their campfire and talk, their conversations ranging from medicine to horses to philosophy. Delilah found herself increasingly drawn to him, not just for his practical help, but for his intelligence, his quiet strength, and the kindness he showed despite his own pain. She caught herself watching the way firelight played across his features, noticed the rare smiles that transformed his usually serious expression, and felt something stirring in her chest that she had thought died with Thomas. The guilt that followed these feelings was crushing. Thomas had been dead less than 3 months. What kind of wife was she, to be developing feelings for another man so soon? She should still be in mourning, should still be wrapped in grief, not noticing the way Isaiah's eyes crinkled when he laughed, or how gentle his hands were with the horses. Isaiah, for his part, seemed to be waging his own internal battle. Delilah would catch him looking at her sometimes with an expression she could not quite name, only for him to quickly look away when their eyes met. He was always respectful, always proper, but there was a growing tension between them that neither seemed willing to acknowledge. On the 7th day, a young Crow man arrived at the trading post with a message for Samuel. After a brief conversation in a language Delilah did not understand, Samuel came to find her and Isaiah. "Speaks with Water will meet with you," he said. "But there are conditions. You go to her camp, not the springs themselves. You show respect for her customs and her people. And you both participate in a purification ceremony before she will even consider discussing the sacred waters." "We agree," Delilah said immediately, relief flooding through her. Samuel gave them directions to the Crow camp and instructions on how to approach without giving offense. They would need to bring gifts, he told them, and he helped them select appropriate items from his trading post's inventory. Tobacco, coffee, sugar, and several yards of blue cloth that he said was particularly valued. They set out the next morning, following Samuel's directions northwest into increasingly rugged terrain. The Bighorn Mountains loomed larger now, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. They followed a river canyon, the water rushing and clear beside them, until they reached a broad meadow where the Crow had set up their summer camp. The camp was larger than Delilah had expected, maybe 30 or 40 lodges arranged in a loose circle, with horses grazing nearby and children playing under the watchful eyes of their mothers. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the air smelled of wood smoke and tanned leather, and something savory that made Delilah's stomach rumble. They were met at the edge of camp by several warriors who regarded them with understandable suspicion. Isaiah spoke to them in halting Crow, clearly struggling with the language, but managing to communicate that Samuel Bridger had sent them to speak with Speaks with Water. After some discussion, one of the warriors gestured for them to follow. They were led through the camp to a lodge painted with symbols Delilah did not recognize, clearly marking it as significant. The warrior called out, and after a moment, an elderly woman emerged. Speaks with Water was small and weathered, her face a map of deep lines, her long gray hair braided and wrapped in otter fur. But her eyes were sharp and clear, missing nothing as she looked over these two white visitors. She spoke in Crow, and Isaiah did his best to translate, though Delilah could tell he was missing much of the nuance. Fortunately, Speaks with Water seemed to understand English better than she spoke it, and between her limited English, Isaiah's broken Crow, and plenty of hand gestures, they managed to communicate. Delilah explained her purpose, showing the medicine woman Thomas's journals and trying to convey her genuine desire to learn rather than exploit. Speaks with Water listened carefully, occasionally asking questions through Isaiah's imperfect translations. When Delilah finished speaking, the medicine woman was silent for a long time, her gaze moving between Delilah and Isaiah with an intensity that felt like it was reading their very souls. Finally, she spoke, and Isaiah translated haltingly. She says the springs are not just water. They are spirit, they are Earth's gift, they are sacred. Many white people do not understand this. They see only water and minerals, not the life force that makes the waters truly heal. I want to understand, Delilah said earnestly. I want to learn properly with respect. Speaks with Water spoke again, more extensively this time. Isaiah's translation was clearly imperfect, but the gist was clear enough. The medicine woman would consider teaching them, but first they must undergo purification. They must sweat out the negative energy they carried, the pain and grief and anger that blocked true healing. Only then could the sacred waters help them. We agree, Delilah said, looking at Isaiah for confirmation. He nodded. Speaks with Water smiled for the first time, a small expression that somehow softened her entire face. She gave instructions to the warriors who had escorted them, and they were led to the edge of the camp, where a sweat lodge had been prepared. The ceremony that followed was intense and transformative in ways Delilah had not expected. Stripped down to their undergarments and separated by gender propriety, with Delilah joining the women and Isaiah with the men, they sat in the steam-filled darkness as water was poured over hot stones, the heat so intense that Delilah thought she might faint. Speaks with Water led the women in songs and prayers, and though Delilah did not understand the words, she felt something shifting inside her. She thought of Thomas, of the months watching him die, of the guilt she had been carrying for not saving him. She thought of her growing feelings for Isaiah and the shame that accompanied them. In the suffocating heat and darkness, surrounded by the voices of women singing in a language older than her civilization, Delilah felt something break open inside her chest. She cried, tears mixing with sweat, her body shaking with sobs she had been holding back for months. The women around her did not judge or try to stop her. They simply continued their songs, their voices holding her as she finally, truly grieved. When they emerged from the sweat lodge hours later, Delilah felt hollowed out but somehow cleaner, lighter. The crushing guilt had not disappeared entirely, but it had loosened its grip on her heart. She found Isaiah waiting near the river, looking similarly wrung out and renewed. "That was intense," he said quietly. "Yes," Delilah agreed, "but necessary, I think." They were given food and places to rest in the camp, treated with a hospitality that touched Delilah deeply. The next morning, Speaks with Water came to them and spoke through a younger woman who served as translator, her English much better than Isaiah's Crow. "Grandmother says you have good hearts," the young woman translated. She says the grief spirit has loosened its hold on the woman, and the pain spirit has marked the man for many years. She will take you to the healing waters, teach you what can be taught. But you must understand, not all healing is of the body. Sometimes the waters heal the spirit first, and the body follows. Sometimes they heal the heart, and that healing ripples outward to everything else. I understand, Delilah said, though she was not sure she fully did. They traveled for a day and a half, Speaks with water leading them on paths that seemed to appear only when they needed them. Trails that wound through forests and along ridges with views that stole Delilah's breath. The medicine woman moved with surprising speed and grace despite her age, while Isaiah struggled more visibly with his injured leg over the rough terrain. Finally, as the sun was lowering on the second day, they rounded a bend and Delilah smelled it. Sulfur and minerals carried on steam that rose from the valley below. They descended carefully, and there they were, the healing springs. There were 3 main pools, each a different size, the water ranging from crystal clear to milky blue-green depending on the mineral content. Steam rose from the surfaces, and the stones around the edges were stained orange and white and red from centuries of mineral deposits. The largest pool was surrounded by carefully placed stones, clearly tended and maintained, a sacred space rather than just a natural phenomenon. Speaks with water spoke, and the young translator who had accompanied them conveyed her words. These waters have been sacred to our people since before memory. They are a gift from earth, from the spirits who dwell in the deep places. Different pools heal different ailments. The largest, with the blue-green water, is strongest for bones and joints, for pain that lives in the body. The clear pool is for skin, for wounds that will not heal. The smallest pool, which steams the most, is for the inside sickness, for lungs and stomach. Delilah's heart raced. The smallest pool for lung ailments. If only she had known about this when Thomas was still alive. But even as that thought formed, she felt the truth of what Speaks with Water had said. Thomas had not been ready to accept help, had given up hope long before his body finally failed. No water, however sacred, could heal someone who had already surrendered to death. Over the following days, Speaks with Water taught them. She showed Delilah which plants grew around the springs and how they contributed to the healing properties. She explained how long one should soak for different ailments, how to prepare the body for the waters through fasting and prayer. She demonstrated how to test the temperature of the water, how to read the steam and the mineral deposits to understand the spring's changing properties with the seasons. Delilah took meticulous notes, sketching the plants, recording water temperatures and mineral observations, documenting everything while being careful to note which knowledge Speaks with Water explicitly said was sacred and should not be shared with outsiders. Isaiah spent most of his time in the largest pool, soaking his injured leg in the hot mineral water. Delilah could see the pain easing from his face day by day, the tension leaving his shoulders, his movements becoming more fluid. But she also saw something else happening. A quietness settling over him, a peace that went deeper than just physical relief. On the 4th night at the springs, as they sat around a small fire with Speaks with Water preparing dinner, the medicine woman spoke directly to Delilah in her halting English. "You carry dead husband in your heart," she said. "Like stone, heavy. You think you must carry always, or you dishonor him. This is not true." Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes. "I loved him, I failed him. You did not fail. Medicine is not God, cannot always save." Speaks with Water reached out and placed a gnarled hand over Delilah's heart. "He is here, yes. Always here, but not stone. Should be light like bird, like memory that makes you smile. You understand. I am trying to, Delilah whispered. Speaks with Water looked at Isaiah, then back at Delilah and smiled knowingly. Heart has room for many loves. Old love, new love, both can live together. Dead husband, he would want you happy. Would want you live, not just exist. That night, Delilah lay in the small shelter they had built near the springs, thinking about Speaks with Water's words. Thomas had been a good man, a kind man. Would he truly want her to spend the rest of her life alone, wrapped in grief and guilt? She knew the answer. Thomas had loved life too fiercely to want her to give up on living. The next day, Speaks with Water declared their education complete. You have learned what can be learned with words and watching, she said through the translator. Now you must experience. Both of you go to the waters, soak until the sun sets. Let the spirits work on what still needs healing. Delilah and Isaiah looked at each other uncertainly, but Speaks with Water was already leaving, heading back toward the Crow camp with the translator, giving them privacy. They maintained propriety. Isaiah soaking in the largest pool while Delilah tried the clear pool some distance away, both still dressed in their undergarments. But as the afternoon wore on and the heat of the water seeped into her bones, Delilah found herself relaxing in ways she had not in months, maybe years. The sun was painting the sky orange and pink when Isaiah called out softly, "Delilah, could you come here for a moment?" Concerned, Delilah climbed out of her pool and walked to where Isaiah sat in the blue-green water. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head, and she saw wonder in his expression. "My leg. The pain is gone, not just reduced, gone. For the first time in 3 years, it does not hurt at all." Delilah's breath caught. "Truly, truly. I do not know if it will last, but right now, this moment, I feel whole again." He looked up at her, and the expression on his face made her heart stutter. "I owe you for this. If you had not been searching for these springs, if we had not met, I would never have found this place." "You helped me too," Delilah said softly. "I could not have gotten here alone." They looked at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with everything they had not been saying. Then Isaiah stood, water streaming off him, and stepped out of the pool. He was close enough that Delilah could see droplets caught in his eyelashes, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Delilah," he said quietly, "I know it has not been long since you lost your husband. I know I have got no right to feel what I am feeling. But being here with you these past weeks, I have started hoping for things I thought I had given up on. A future, a home, someone to share it with." Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Isaiah, I have been fighting what I feel. Telling myself it is too soon, that I am dishonoring Thomas's memory. But Speaks with Water was right. Thomas would not want me to stop living. And what I feel when I am with you, it is not the same as what I felt with Thomas, but it is real. It is good." Isaiah reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm and slightly rough against her skin. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Delilah breathed. His kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though he was afraid she might break. But when she leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the familiar comfort of kissing Thomas. This was new and thrilling and just a little bit frightening in its intensity. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Delilah Zimmerman. Have been since you told me to get lost back when your wagon broke down, all fierce and determined and refusing to admit you needed help." Delilah laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine joy. "I am falling in love with you too, Isaiah Vance, even though you followed me like some kind of stubborn shadow and turned my solitary quest into a partnership." "Stubborn shadow," Isaiah repeated, mock offended. "Is that any way to talk to a man who fixed your wagon wheel?" "It is exactly the way to talk to a man who was following me without permission," Delilah retorted. But she was smiling, actually smiling, and it felt like the first real smile since Thomas had died. They held each other as the sun set, the sacred spring steaming around them, and Delilah felt something fundamental shift in her heart. The grief was still there, would always be there in some form, but it no longer defined her. She was not just Thomas's widow anymore. She was Delilah, a woman with her own purpose and dreams. And increasingly, she was a woman in love with the quiet cowboy who had helped her find healing waters that healed them both. They stayed at the springs for another week, documenting everything Delilah could without violating the sacred knowledge Speaks with Water had asked her to protect. Isaiah's leg continued to improve, the chronic pain that had plagued him for 3 years fading to nothing. He could walk without limping, could move with the fluid grace of a man 10 years younger. "I feel like I have been given my life back," he told Delilah one evening as they sat by their fire. 3 years I have been thinking my working days were numbered, that I would end up crippled and useless before I was 30. Now I can actually think about a future, actually plan for something beyond just getting through each day. What kind of future do you want?" Delilah asked, genuinely curious. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "I have been thinking about that. I've got enough saved to buy some land, not a lot but enough for a small ranch. Someplace I could raise horses, maybe some cattle. Someplace with good water, good grass. Build a real home, not just bunk in a camp or a boarding house." He paused, then looked at her. "Someplace I could build a life with someone if she was willing." Delilah's breath caught. "Isaiah, are you asking what I think you are asking?" "Not yet," he said quickly. "Not properly. It is too soon and you need time. But I want you to know what I am thinking about, what I am hoping for. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would like to build that future with you." Delilah reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I need some time," she admitted. "Not because I do not want that future. I think I do very much. But I need to finish what I started here. I need to complete my research, document these springs properly, maybe find other sites. I need to know I am choosing this future for the right reasons, not just because I am afraid to be alone." "I understand," Isaiah said, squeezing her hand. "And I will wait, however long you need." They returned to the Crow camp the next day, where Speaks with Water greeted them with knowing eyes and a satisfied smile. Through the translator, she asked Delilah what she planned to do with the knowledge she had gained. "I want to document it," Delilah said. "Write about the healing properties I observed, the plants that grow here, the mineral content of the waters. But I will not include anything you told me was sacred, and I will not specify the exact location of these springs. I will make it clear that these are Crow lands and any access should be negotiated with your people directly." Speaks with Water nodded approvingly. "There are other springs," she said through the translator. "Not all sacred like these, but still with healing power. Some on land white men already claim. Those springs you could write about more freely, yes. Help sick people without bringing trouble to my people." Delilah had not considered that, but it made perfect sense. "Yes, absolutely. If you could tell me where to find them, I could research those as well." Over the next several days, Speaks with Water shared knowledge of other hot springs scattered throughout the territories. Some were in places that had already been settled by whites, some were on public lands, and a few were on other tribal territories, where Speaks with Water thought the leaders might be willing to share knowledge in exchange for proper respect and compensation. Delilah's research project, which had started as a desperate widow's quest for meaning, was growing into something much larger. She began to envision a comprehensive study of medicinal springs throughout the Western Territories, documenting their properties and potential healing applications, while being mindful of the rights and sacred sites of Indigenous peoples. Isaiah supported her vision completely, and they began making plans. They would travel together to the various springs Speaks with Water had told them about, documenting each one. Isaiah would provide protection and practical skills for wilderness travel, while Delilah did the scientific observation and recording. When they had gathered enough data, Delilah would compile it into a proper medical treatise. Before they left the Crow camp, Speaks with Water pulled Delilah aside for a private conversation. Through the translator, she said, "You came here wounded, seeking healing in water. But what healed you was not just springs, was purpose, was respect for knowledge, was opening heart to new love. Remember this when you write your papers. Healing is not just medicine. Is spirit, is community, is hope." "I will remember," Delilah promised, embracing the old woman carefully. "Thank you for everything you have taught me." They spent the next 4 months traveling throughout Wyoming Territory and into Montana, researching springs and documenting everything they found. They visited hot springs near what would eventually become Thermopolis, documenting the massive travertine terraces and the healing properties locals attributed to the waters. They traveled to springs on the Shoshone Reservation, where they were granted limited access after Isaiah negotiated carefully with the tribal leaders, and they offered fair compensation. Everywhere they went, Delilah observed, tested, measured, and recorded. She documented water temperatures, mineral content, the plants that grew in proximity, and the healing claims associated with each site. She interviewed people who had used the springs, recording their experiences and any observable health improvements. Isaiah assisted with all of it, his practical knowledge and easy way with people proving invaluable. But it was not all work. They also fell deeper in love with each passing day. They maintained propriety, sleeping in separate bedrolls and being careful about appearances when they passed through towns. But the connection between them grew stronger and more undeniable. They learned each other's habits and quirks, discovered how well they worked together, built the kind of partnership that comes from shared purpose and genuine respect. As autumn began to color the mountains and the air turned crisp with the promise of winter, they found themselves in Helena, Montana Territory, staying at a respectable boarding house while Delilah organized her months of research notes. One evening, as they sat in the boarding house parlor working on her documentation, Isaiah set down the pen he had been using to help sketch maps and said, "Delilah, I think it is time I asked you something properly." Delilah looked up from her notes, her heart already beginning to race because she knew what was coming. Isaiah stood and came around the table, then did something that made her breath catch. He lowered himself to one knee, his healed leg holding him steady and strong. "Delilah Zimmerman, these past months with you have been the best of my life. You are brilliant and brave and so determined it is sometimes terrifying. You have given me back my health and my hope for the future. You have shown me what it means to have a true partner, someone who challenges me and supports me and makes me want to be better than I am. I love you with everything I have, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Delilah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy, not grief. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, absolutely yes." Isaiah stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly while the boarding house owner made a scandalized noise from the doorway, and then a pleased one when she realized what was happening. They were married 3 weeks later in Helena, in a simple ceremony at the small church with the boarding house owner and her husband as witnesses. Delilah wore a simple blue dress, having put away her widow's black for good. Isaiah wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his face shaved smooth. As they exchanged vows, Delilah felt Thomas's memory present but not painful, like a warm hand on her shoulder giving his blessing. She was not forgetting him or replacing him. She was simply moving forward, choosing life and love and hope over grief and stagnation. After the wedding, they discussed their future seriously. Isaiah still wanted his ranch, his piece of land where he could build something permanent. Delilah wanted to continue her research, but also wanted a home base, a place to return to between expeditions. They found their answer in a small valley about 20 miles outside of Lusk, Wyoming, back where Delilah's journey had started. The land had good water from a spring-fed creek, sheltered grazing for livestock, and enough timber to build a proper house. Isaiah used his savings to purchase it, and they spent the winter of 1882 and the spring of 1883 building their home. It was hard work, but deeply satisfying. Isaiah proved skilled at carpentry and construction, while Delilah applied herself to learning skills she had never needed as a doctor's wife in town. Cooking over a wood stove, tending a vegetable garden, helping manage livestock. They hired occasional help from nearby homesteaders, and in return helped their neighbors with various tasks, building the kind of community support that was essential for survival on the frontier. By summer of 1883, they had a modest but sturdy house, a barn, a corral with half a dozen horses that Isaiah was training, and a small herd of cattle. Delilah had also compiled her research into a comprehensive manuscript documenting medicinal springs throughout the territories, their properties, and their potential healing applications. She sent the manuscript to several medical journals back east, not expecting much response, but hoping someone would take her research seriously, despite her lack of formal medical credentials. To her surprise and delight, the Journal of American Medical Sciences accepted her paper for publication, though they wanted her to present her findings at their annual conference in Philadelphia. The journey east in the fall of 1883 was the farthest Delilah had traveled since her wedding. Isaiah accompanied her, both of them awed by the transition from open frontier to increasingly settled country, and finally, to the crowded, bustling city of Philadelphia. The medical conference was intimidating. Delilah was the only woman presenting research, and many of the male doctors initially dismissed her work. But when she presented her meticulously documented findings, complete with chemical analyses of mineral content, temperature readings, documented case studies, and acknowledgement of indigenous knowledge, even the skeptics had to take notice. Her paper created considerable interest, particularly her careful documentation of different springs' properties and her ethical framework for researching sites on indigenous lands. Several doctors approached her afterward with questions, and 2 universities expressed interest in funding further research. More importantly to Delilah, her work caught the attention of a group advocating for better health care in Western territories. They offered her a position as a research consultant, which would involve traveling to document medicinal resources throughout the frontier while providing medical information to isolated communities. It was perfect. The position paid enough to support their ranch and allowed her to continue her research while actually helping people. She accepted immediately. Over the next several years, Delilah and Isaiah established a rhythm to their lives. Each spring and summer, weather permitting, they would travel to research new sites, with Delilah documenting medicinal springs and Isaiah managing their transportation and logistics, while building connections with indigenous communities and frontier settlers alike. Each fall and winter, they would return to their ranch, where Isaiah would focus on horse breeding and training while Delilah compiled her research and wrote papers. Their partnership flourished, both personally and professionally. Isaiah's reputation as a skilled horse trainer grew, and people came from considerable distances to purchase animals he had trained. Delilah published several more papers and became recognized as an authority on natural medicine and mineral springs. More significantly, she served as a bridge between indigenous healing knowledge and Western medicine, always careful to respect sacred knowledge while sharing information that could help people. In the spring of 1885, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had always wanted children but had given up on that dream during Thomas's illness. Now, at 27, she was going to be a mother. The pregnancy was difficult, particularly in the late stages when travel became impossible, and Delilah chafed at being confined to the ranch. But Isaiah was patient and supportive, taking over her more physical chores and reading aloud to her from medical journals in the evenings. Their son was born in January of 1886, during a blizzard that made getting a doctor impossible. Delilah ended up delivering with only Isaiah and a neighbor woman to help, which was terrifying but also strangely fitting given how much of their life together had involved relying on themselves and each other. They named him Thomas Samuel Vance, honoring both Delilah's first husband and Samuel Bridger, who had been instrumental in helping them find the healing springs that had changed their lives. Motherhood transformed Delilah in ways she had not anticipated. She had thought she might resent the limitations it placed on her research travel, but instead, she found herself fascinated by this new role, documenting her son's development with the same meticulous attention she gave to her spring research. Isaiah proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle with their son while still maintaining the ranch and his horse training business. When Thomas was 6 months old, they received word that Speaks with Water had died peacefully in her sleep, having lived to see nearly 90 winters. The news hit Delilah hard. She wanted to attend whatever ceremonies the Crow held, to pay her respects to the woman who had taught her so much. They made the journey north with baby Thomas, arriving at the Crow camp to find preparations underway for an elaborate ceremony honoring the medicine woman. They were welcomed warmly, treated as friends of the deceased, and allowed to participate in the mourning rituals. During the ceremony, the young woman who had served as translator years before approached Delilah. She was Speaks with Water's granddaughter, she explained, and the medicine woman had left something for Delilah. It was a small leather pouch containing dried herbs and a carved stone. Through her granddaughter, Speaks with Water's final message was conveyed. Tell the white woman doctor that she honored her promises and her heart stayed good. The sacred springs remain protected, but knowledge has been shared where it can help. This is balance. This is how healing should work. Delilah clutched the pouch, tears streaming down her face, feeling the weight of that trust and approval. Over the following years, their family grew. A daughter, Rebecca, arrived in 1888, followed by another son, Daniel, in 1890. Their ranch prospered, expanding to include more acreage and a larger horse breeding operation. Delilah continued her research, though she traveled less extensively, focusing instead on documenting medicinal plants closer to home and serving as a consultant for doctors throughout Wyoming and Montana. Isaiah's leg never troubled him again. Whatever healing had occurred in those sacred springs had been permanent, allowing him to work his ranch well into his later years. He often said that Delilah had given him his life back, but she always countered that they had healed each other. In 1895, Wyoming achieved statehood, and the Vance Ranch was well positioned to benefit from the increased settlement and development. They added guest cabins to their property and began hosting visitors interested in learning about frontier medicine and natural healing. Delilah would give lectures on medicinal springs and plants, always careful to respect indigenous knowledge while sharing what could be ethically shared. Through it all, their love deepened and matured. The passionate intensity of their early relationship mellowed into something steadier but no less profound. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine friendship alongside romantic love. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1898, Isaiah took Delilah back to the sacred springs where they had first acknowledged their love for each other. It was summer, and they brought their children, wanting to share this place that had been so important to their story. They had gotten permission from the Crow, as they always did, and Speaks with Water's granddaughter met them there, now serving as a medicine woman herself. She allowed the children to wade in the shallow edges of the clear pool, while Delilah and Isaiah soaked in the large blue-green pool, holding hands under the water. "You ever regret it?" Isaiah asked quietly. "Giving up your research career back east, the recognition you could have had if you had stayed in the academic world." Delilah looked around at the steaming springs, at their 3 healthy children laughing and playing, at the mountains rising majestically around them, and most of all at the man beside her, gray starting to thread through his dark hair but his eyes still as clear and loving as the day he had first kissed her. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "I found what I was looking for when I set out on this journey, not just healing springs, though I found those too. I found purpose. I found a way to honor Thomas's memory while still building a new life. I found community, I found knowledge, and most of all, I found you. That is worth more than any academic recognition." Isaiah pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I love you, Delilah Vance. I love you too, Isaiah Vance. Always have, always will." Their children, seeing their parents embrace, made exaggerated gagging sounds that turned into giggles. Thomas, now 12 and already showing signs of inheriting his father's height, called out, "Are you two going to be mushy all day, or can we explore?" "Go explore," Delilah called back, laughing. "But stay where we can see you, and do not go near the hot pools without us." They watched their children scramble off to investigate the mineral formations and wildflowers growing around the springs, their voices echoing in the valley. Rebecca was already collecting samples, showing early signs of inheriting her mother's scientific curiosity, while Daniel was more interested in the tracks of animals that had come to the springs to drink. "We built something good," Isaiah said quietly. "Not just the ranch or your research. This family, this life, the connections we have made with people out here. It is all good and real and worth everything it took to get here." Delilah nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones along with the healing heat of the mineral water. Her journey had started in grief and desperation, a widow searching for meaning in medicinal springs. But what she had found was so much more than she could have imagined. She had found healing, yes, but not in the way she had expected. The springs had helped Isaiah's leg and had provided the framework for her research and career. But the real healing had come from opening her heart again, from learning to balance honoring the past while embracing the future, from building a life based on respect, partnership, and love. As the sun began to set, painting the steam rising from the springs in shades of gold and pink, Delilah felt profoundly grateful. Grateful to Thomas for their years together and the foundation of medical knowledge he had given her. Grateful to Speaks with Water for her wisdom and trust. Grateful to Samuel Bridger for making the connections that brought everything together. And most of all, grateful to Isaiah for being the partner she needed, for loving her through her grief and uncertainty, for building this beautiful life with her. Years continued to pass, bringing changes as they always did. Their children grew up strong and capable. Thomas Jr. became a veterinarian, combining his mother's scientific interests with his father's love of animals. Rebecca followed her mother's footsteps more directly, becoming one of the first women to attend medical school and eventually specializing in natural medicine and frontier health care. Daniel took over the ranch, proving to have his father's gift with horses and his mother's business sense. As Wyoming transitioned from frontier territory to established state, Delilah and Isaiah transitioned from young pioneers to respected elders in their community. They watched the Wild West gradually transform, railroad lines cutting across the prairie, towns growing into cities, the open range being fenced and settled. Some changes they mourned. The displacement of indigenous peoples continued despite their advocacy and efforts to build respectful relationships. The sacred springs they had visited were increasingly threatened by commercial interests and development. But they did what they could, using Delilah's reputation and their connections to protect what sites they could, ensuring some remained in tribal control and others were set aside as protected areas. In 1912, when Delilah was 54 and Isaiah was 57, they made one last pilgrimage to the sacred springs. Their children were grown with families of their own, and the ranch was in Daniel's capable hands. They wanted to return to the place where their love had truly begun, where they had both found healing and hope. The journey was harder now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard frontier living, but they made it. The springs were unchanged, still steaming and mineral-rich, still sacred and powerful. They soaked in the warm water, holding hands as they had 30 years before and felt the years falling away. "If I could go back," Isaiah said, "back to that day when I saw you loading your wagon in Lusk, I would do it all exactly the same. Every mile, every challenge, every moment. It all led here to this life we have built together." "So would I," Delilah agreed. "Though I might have been slightly less hostile when you first offered to help." Isaiah laughed, the sound echoing across the water. "You were not that hostile, suspicious maybe, wary, but I saw through that immediately. I saw a woman who was scared and grieving but too stubborn to give up. That is what I fell in love with first, you know. That fierce determination not to let loss destroy you." They stayed at the springs for a week, reliving memories and making new ones, talking through the nights about their life together and the lives their children were building. On their last night, they lay under the stars, the sound of the springs a constant soothing presence, and Delilah felt a deep sense of completion. She had set out as a widow researching medicinal springs, desperate for purpose and meaning. She had found a cowboy who led her to waters that healed them both, but the healing had been so much more than physical. They had healed each other's hearts, built a life of purpose and love, raised children who carried forward their values of respect, knowledge, and compassion. As she drifted off to sleep in Isaiah's arms, Delilah thought about the advice Speaks with Water had given her all those years ago. That healing was not just medicine but spirit, community, and hope. She had lived that truth, built her life around it, and passed it on to her children. The story of the widow and the cowboy became part of local legend, told and retold in the communities around Lusk and throughout Wyoming. Some versions were romanticized, adding details that never happened. But the core truth remained. Two wounded people had found each other and found healing not just in sacred waters but in love, partnership, and shared purpose. They lived well into their 70s, both of them, dying within months of each other in 1929. They were buried side by side on their ranch, which their descendants would maintain for generations. At their funeral, Rebecca read from her mother's journals, sharing the story of how Delilah and Isaiah had met and fallen in love, how they had built a life together based on respect and partnership. They healed each other, Rebecca told the gathered crowd of children, grandchildren, and community members. The springs helped, but the real healing came from opening their hearts to hope and to love. That is the legacy they left us. That healing is always possible if we are brave enough to seek it and generous enough to share it. The medicinal springs Delilah had documented became the foundation for health resorts throughout the western states, bringing healing to thousands. But they were always managed with the ethical framework she had established, respecting indigenous rights and knowledge, protecting sacred sites, and ensuring that healing remained accessible rather than exploited for pure profit. Her research papers remained in print for decades, considered foundational texts in natural medicine and medical geography. But more than her published work, Delilah's legacy lived on in the approach she pioneered, combining scientific rigor with respect for traditional knowledge, advocating for ethical research practices, and understanding that true healing addresses body, mind, and spirit. Isaiah's legacy was quieter but no less profound. The horses he bred became known throughout the region for their strength and temperament. The land management practices he developed helped preserve the grasslands even as the surrounding areas were overgrazed and degraded. Most importantly, the example he set of partnership and respect in marriage influenced his children and grandchildren, creating a family culture of equality and mutual support that was unusual for the era. But perhaps their greatest legacy was simply the proof that healing and love were possible even after devastating loss. That widows could rebuild their lives without forgetting their past. That wounded cowboys could find hope again. That two people from different backgrounds could create something beautiful together based on shared values and genuine respect. The sacred springs continued to flow, as they had for thousands of years, and would for thousands more. The minerals continued to leach from deep in the earth, creating waters that eased pain and promoted healing. Indigenous peoples continued to honor the springs as sacred, and thanks in part to Delilah and Isaiah's advocacy, several sites remained protected in tribal hands. On quiet summer evenings, when the light turned golden and the steam rose from the pools in lazy spirals, locals would sometimes tell the story of the widow and the cowboy, of how they had found each other and found healing in the sacred waters. The details would vary with each telling, but the heart of the story remained true. Two people wounded in different ways had come together, had respected the land and its indigenous keepers, had built a life of purpose and love, and in the end, that was what healing truly meant. Not just the absence of pain or the curing of disease, but the building of lives worth living, the creation of love worth cherishing, the passing on of knowledge and values to future generations. Delilah and Isaiah had sought healing waters, but what they had really found was each other, and that made all the difference.